Hello, this is Joe from Shadowrex, and I figured for this next update I wanted to do something a little bit more visual. So I wanted to demonstrate for you in more clear terms what this injection molding is all about, what a two-part mold versus a three-part mold is, and kind of why we're going for this as our final effort here, our push to get the perfect shadow rack. So what we have here is an approximation of what an injection mold would look like. We have this block of steel. It's divided into a couple pieces. There's a port for injecting plastic, and just for the sake of demonstration, I'm just using one port. Our mold will have just one port just because of the size of it and the amount of material we need to get in there. And then on this side, just a couple pins for alignment of the pieces of the mold. So basically how injection mold works is you have a chunk of steel, and say there's highlighted in orange, there's one piece and there's the other piece. There's usually a back, which has the injection ports, and the front that has little pins that help push out your final material. And you have a cavity inside that is the reverse of the thing that you want to make. So there's our little cavity in there of the shadow rack, and I'll open this up and show you. But so it's empty in there, and then they heat up plastic until it's molten, shoot it inside under force, which is the injection part of it. And then once it cools, they pull the mold apart so you can get your product. And I'll show you here. So say after we've injected plastic and we pull this one out, you can see these are sort of pins to align up the segment. They'd be more sophisticated than this. But you can see we have our shadow rack in there. There's a little port for the plastic to come through. Now I'll turn around and show you. So this would be the face of it, and this is the reverse of your shadow rack. And what the issue we were running into is we have these really deep grooves. So they're as deep as the shadow rack prongs are. These they're sticking out over here. So they have to be, I think it's some depth, but also highly precise, because they want to get exactly the dimension we need, the diameter to match the color pop or other makeup containers to fit in there, and also the curves and all the geometry in there. So having that be blind, and a blind hole just means that it doesn't come through the other side. So you go to a certain depth in here, and that's where it ends. And the problem with that is it's very difficult to get tools in there. You have to custom make something called an EDM tool, which is an electrode, a piece of metal that's shaped exactly like the shadow rack, and then plunge it into the metal, shoot an electrical current through it, and it breaks the steel down little bit by little bit. Now what happens with that is, with this type of cut, with a high detail that we wanted, they pushed it a little bit too hot for expediency's sake, and it ended up degrading the surface here. So there were more gouges and grooves on these inside surfaces that needed to get polished out. And when they did polish it out, they removed a little too much material compared to what we wanted. So this diameter here shrunk. So they removed material on the top and bottom and top of those sockets, so that when the plastic was shot into it, there was more plastic than we needed for that cavity. So these cavities became too tight and caused the whole thing to bow when it was loaded up with racks. So that's why a two mold might work, but it would require either a lot of time hand tuning and hand sanding, and it's pretty difficult to get in there with ordinary tools. So instead, we are going to try, or we are working on, it's in production now, a three-part mold. See, this is roughly the same size. I think I modeled it exactly the same size as the two-part mold. It still has one injection port, and it still has alignment pins. The only difference is, instead of having two halves that match together, we have three that sandwich together. So we have this part, which forms the cap. You can already see here these prongs are already sticking out. But if we look over here, see, this is where the tips of the prongs, or the tips of the cavities, get made, and it doesn't go in very deep. It's just the very end of those grooves. And that's much easier to get to than trying to dig through a big deep hole, an X-shaped groove, to get to it. And then the second one, pull that one out a bit further. Pull that one out a bit further. No need to look at it anymore. This one here, so what we can do is that one now has what are called through holes. So in addition to, it still has the facing here. This forms the top surface of the shadow rack, but those grooves that go through to form the retention prongs are able to drill all the way through. Yeah, all the way through. And that makes it a lot easier to machine because you can use drills to go all the way through and sand it from both sides, and it's a lot easier to manufacture to the spec that we want without specialized tools like UDM. And it's still going to be highly precise in that all of these grooves have to match up. So the shape of this X here has to exactly match the shape of this X here. But they're able to do that without risk of going too far or not far enough and ending up with a cavity that is going to give us an inferior result. So once those are all pulled apart, and this back piece will also get pulled back away from it, and the shadow rack pops out, looking just nice and fresh. So yeah, hopefully this was illuminating. It's I think a pretty interesting process, but just to go through it real quickly, you cut out what we want, just like with an ice cube tray or any other molding process, and then they clamp it together, shoot some plastic in, and we end up with this. There we go. Yeah, so that's our update for now. If I didn't mention already, we are looking at the mold is being made, and we should have samples finished in mid-March. I think the estimate they were last given was March 12th, but I'll be following up within this next week to get a more firm date. And if those samples look good, then it's off to the polisher again to get it nice and crisp, just a nice shine to it. And then if everything's fine, our production should be moving forward relatively quickly. So hope that was interesting. Go ahead and leave a comment if you have any further questions. I'd be happy to answer them. Thanks for watching.